on a roll, from his hilarious portrayal of Assistant DA Dan Fielding on Night Court to his current gig as manager of a St. Louis bus station in the hit NBC comedy The John Larroquett Show. We'll be talking tonight with four-time Emmy winner John Larroquett. And then later on, is there life after running one of America's most dynamic cities? We'll find out from a man who was elected New York's first African-American mayor in 1989. He lost his bid for re-election in '93 to Rudy Giuliani. Former Mayor David Dinkins will join us, coming straight up on Straightforward. If you piece together the facts presented in his bio, this man could have wound up a wandering priest who writes poetry. But fortunately for us, he turned to comedy, and his comedy turns have, on film, feature films and in television, never missed their mark. John Larroquett, you're great.
Oh, thank you.
You're a really talented guy. And you started out as a disc jockey.
We have similar taste in watches, too. Look at this.
Same watch. Get it close up.
Separated at birth.
Tight shot on the watches. That's great. That is true. Disc jockey.
Yes.
Yeah. Why did you get out of that?
Radio at the time seemed like a bit of a dead end because the music had changed considerably by 1971 when I decided to leave. Because I was really as a teenager, worked in a classical radio station, but in the late 60s, because of the advent of all the album music that came out after with John Hammond at Columbia, and rock and roll really started to take its position, and we realized that FM radio was stereo. But it became successful,
right?
And so it became less. A
lot of radio guys can't make the transition. They're very shy. They work well in that closed booth, but when they're outside, they can't. Was that transition tough for you, or were you always a kind of outgoing guy?
I think I was an actor from the get-go, and radio was the first place I could actually demonstrate that. I mean, when you look at people like Jonathan Winters, and I think even Dick Van Dyke was a DJ in these early days.
Right.
It was the outlet that was most available to me to try to learn how to act with this, and I acted with this for a long time before the body came into play.
How much of the characters you play are built from you? I mean, there's a kind of the oversexed part of the lawyer in Night Court. Did they say...
That character really grew into that. When that character first came on the air, he was much more conservative and rather reserved, but pompous certainly, and arrogant.
Right.
And I think that my sense of humor has a tendency to go toward the ribald for sure. And Reinhold Wigge, who created that show, was also of that mind. So as he and I started working together, that the other elements of Mr. Fielding came out. Jason Robards said something that I've always taken to heart, that every character is stuck with the actor who plays him. You can watch 5 Hamlets, and it's 5 different actors, and it's 5 different characters.
That's true. That's very good.
But characters are not autobiographical.
No, you don't have to. Although, and I read this somewhere, and I guess it's not a secret, or I wouldn't bring it up on the air, but at one point you had a drinking problem. And the character you're currently playing in the show that you executive produce had a drinking problem as well. You obviously chose that character, right?
Yes.
Why'd you put that element in?
Well, I didn't choose. No, I didn't create the character. A year after Night Court ended, and I was sitting at home after fishing for a year and spending time with my family. My wife said, "Get a job, please." So I started reading scripts just to find someone who I thought I might like to work with, not even really looking for a specific project. And I read this script that was written by Don Rio, and he couldn't sell it at the time he wrote it, which was about 3 years previous to me reading it. And I just loved the character, I loved the ensemble, I loved the atmosphere. And to me, humor is a major ingredient in any kind of recovery. If you're willing to laugh at your dilemma, you're halfway into perchance not letting it have control over you. And I liked that in the character. So I didn't create him alcoholic. He was when he was created.
Did that attract you to the character because you understood it?
Well, partially, but what attracted me most was the fact that the way it had been written was this man actually had a sense of humor about his condition, which I think is I was tired of seeing portrayals of
victims
alcoholics
and
of just
pathetic
and destroyed for the rest of I'm going to be sober, I won't drink, I promise. I wanted the guy to be happy and joyous and free, as they say.
Yeah. You're executive producer. So if this thing really hits big, I guess what do they have to do? 100 episodes to make
it seems like
really make a lot of money?
Yeah.
And then they go out in syndication, you make money. You can fish for 7-8 years.
Right. I can have somebody fish for me. I won't even have to fish anymore myself.
So that's the payout. How many episodes have you shot?
55.
Oh, well, you're on your way. You're over the mid hump.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a guarantee that there's going to be a huge amount of money after that 100. It certainly depends upon your performance in your life on prime time. I mean, a show like Tim Allen's or like Seinfeld, or I guess the landmark case was Bill Cosby when he went out there, like 2 million something per episode in syndication. I mean, that was a bonanza, and it depends upon how well you do in your primetime run as to what you're going to get out once you get out there in the other world.
But there've been episodes that come off network and do very well in syndication that didn't do all that well in the network. I mean, there have been shows that
Strangely enough, Night Court was a bit of an example of that. Although Night Court was a highly rated show, it really took off in syndication and was extremely popular, and still is. I mean, I run across my face 10 years younger several times a day, and it depresses the hell out of me.
Well, were you on Baba Black Sheep, which is Robert Conrad was here as a guest on this show.
Yes.
We were talking about that series. I loved that series.
That
Never
was
missed that series.
my first regular gig was as a regular on that show. On the 3 years it ran, it was rather short-lived. Well, you guys have really pulled up some. You see what I'm talking about? Looking at yourself. You look at yourself, then you look in the mirror, and you look more like Larry Storch than you thought. You know. That was 1976.
My God, that's 20 years.
Yepper.
20 years.
Time flies when you're unconscious.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you, in your own life, going through the alcohol thing, how long did you have that problem?
I would say that I drank professionally for about 8 or 10 years.
Is it true that you once wanted or considered going into the priesthood?
Yeah, I think that's more of a fantasy of any young Catholic boy. I mean, growing up, being born and raised in New Orleans of very deep Catholic roots and being taught by nuns and priests all my formative years, I think it became, my first heroes were priests.
Okay.
That, oh, gee.
Where'd you guys get that picture?
Good.
Where'd you get that
God
picture?
almighty. My dog did that. You see that Band-Aid on the bottom of my...
Yes, put that picture back up.
I was going home from I had picked up some pork chops from my mother, and I was walking in my yard, and my dog Duke jumped on my back because he smelled the meat, and my hands were around my chest with the meat, and I went right down on the cobblestone of my grandfather put in the driveway and just split this open like a bad fig. You know, it just came apart. But Duke did that. What in the hell did you find?
Well, you'd mentioned you're coming across pictures of yourself at a younger age at all times.
Yes, well, do you have any in utero while we're here? A little sonogram. But as I got older, the priesthood became less attractive only because maybe change in philosophy of myself, and also the idea that I didn't realize quite until I was around 15 that you really had to be a pretty good student to be a priest, and I wasn't that good in school, and I thought that I want to be a priest, and they'd give you a robe and some beads, and you could go out
and hang around
and be a missionary if you wanted to be.
Do you still have that streak in you, that do-gooder streak, though? Because I don't think anybody wants to be a clergy man, woman, whatever they are, unless there's something about their upbringing that said, they want to help other people.
You know what? I don't know about that. You know, I remember as a kid, I think, and it was more selfish. I think I really wanted to.
You wanted to wear the robe.
I wanted to show people how holy I was. You know, and it was probably the wrong motive. You know, I used to go to bed at night and pray that I'd wake up with the stigmata, so everybody could see how much I suffered. And so it was probably the wrong motives to begin with, and hence not a real calling to the service of God.
You mentioned your philosophy changed. Did your beliefs about religion change, or?
For a short while. I mean, in the '60s, I read Friedrich Nietzsche and decided that I was an atheist. I decided I'm an atheist now. And as I have matured, I think that's changed. I wouldn't say that I'm a great believer in organized religion nor in the Western view of God as, somebody.
How do you bring your kids up? What do you tell them about it?
Actually, my 8-year-old is a Catholic. He goes to a Catholic school, and I wanted him to feel a real part of the community. So when he requested, he's 8 years old, he requested that he be baptized, so he could be, not be on the outside when the kids went to church or went to communion. I was all in favor of that. My wife grew up C of E. She's from the north of England, so she's got a good spiritual background as well.
Beautiful. Wow.
You see, that one there is now 18, that boy. I'm not even talking about him. And the girl, my daughter, just gave us our first grandchild. 25 years old. She just had her first son.
Is that right?
Yeah. But the Catholics have changed a lot. When I went to reconciliation with Benjamin, all of a sudden they told me that purgatory was a car wash. Is how they described it. And when I was a kid, purgatory was anything, but it might have been a car wash, but it had boiling water in it. But the church has changed. I think Vatican II helped that. I think when John the 23rd started saying, we've got to open our arms like this instead of like this, that a lot of the mythology became more that, which I think is important. The stories are real important. I love Benjamin reading about what great men did in the past, but not necessarily take it for absolute fact, but look for his truth beyond the story is more important.
How would Benjamin describe you?
A funny man.
A funny man. You're funny with your kids.
Yeah, fortunately, he would describe me as a funny man, and he's got a great sense of humor. He's really hooked in to Fawlty Towers right now. I was talking to Elizabeth last night, and he's watching Fawlty Towers on Laserdisc. And if you can appreciate John Cleese's humor, then you've got a pretty sharp wit about you.
Yeah, well, John was here also on this show. We got to take a break. We got to take a break here. Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about this John Larroquett show. Is that what the name of it is now?
It is, the John Larroquett Show.
Yeah, okay. We're going to talk about that further and talk about life in the bus station. We'll be right back.
Catherine.
Hey, Catherine, where are you?
I'm at home. Where are you?
Well, I'm at a Cardinals game. Hold on a second, I have to do the wave. My row sucked.
You know what I like about what you do? Your acting is so, you act like people really act when they don't think anybody's seeing them. I don't know how you do that. But
well, it's good.
You know what I'm saying?
That's a great compliment. Thank you.
It really is. I mean, you really act like nobody's watching you.
You know, that's interesting you bring that up. When I was a kid watching Art Carney and Jackie Gleason, who were my gods, I try to pattern my body as much after Art Carney as I can. When I watch movies and watch actors when they're alone in dramas and stuff, it's difficult to act naturally. You know, you never see a guy grab his pants and adjust himself in a hallway, or maybe find one, that he has to. It's sometimes very unreal the way they actually perform when they're alone.
Absolutely. What's interesting, I read that you started as a serious actor in The Crucible or something.
That was my first job. Yes, my first job. And it wasn't, I didn't mean to start as a serious actor. It was the first gig that I was offered. So, as an actor,
it must be hard for you to keep a straight face for 3 hours.
Well, it wasn't, because I was playing a priest. I played Reverend Hale, the exorcist, so that I got to live out some fantasies.
Yeah.
I got to put a Roman collar on and actually do that. But the second one was actually the one that started my career, and it was a comedy. The one I got an agent from, and my wife from, actually.
What are you going to do? I mean, you're going to do this show. Obviously, you want to get it up to at least 100, and then you can fish for 8 years. But what else you want to do with your life? You're a writer?
I look forward in the next 40 years of seeing men that I can't touch now as an actor. I'm too young to play Eugene O'Neill's father in Long Day's Journey Into Night. I'm too young to play King Lear. I'm getting to the point where I could play Willie Loman if I wanted to, the tallest Willie Loman in history, I suppose.
That's right.
But as an actor, I just look forward. Samuel Beckett wrote a play called Krapp's Last Tape that's about a 70-year-old man, and I would love to. I look forward to the ability of doing those things, because no matter what else I do, I think I'm an actor out of compulsion and need, and I never
need for
never
applause or need for self-expression or need for what?
I think it's the way I express deeper feelings about life that I'm not articulate enough, perchance, to do by speaking my own mind or by writing. Writing is certainly a crucible that I have been unwilling to take up, and it's something that I hope I get the courage to do at some point. But Ernest Hemingway once said that people can write those that can't talk about it, so I try not to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I write on Friday
really
nights.
True.
I write on Friday nights. When I'm in front of an audience, I write, because I'll do the script the first time the way it's on the page,
and then
we usually do 2 takes in front of the audience in the evening, and then I'll start creating, and that's when I really do my writing.
Would you take criticism of your writing more harshly than you take criticism of your acting? You strike me as a sensitive guy, and one of the reasons you're delaying going into writing is criticism of your thought process and writing.
That may be very true. Most people don't criticize. Most people don't. At this point in my acting career, I don't get a lot of criticism.
No.
Not that I'm not good. It's
but
just
you also don't
my
have a
world.
fear of it because you're a star and you've gotten there through your acting. So, if they either like the show or they don't like it. If they don't like the show, they're going to...
I have experienced that when I've pitched a joke, particularly to my wife, who is my harshest critic and the most loyal fan as well. I find myself going, what are you talking about? What do you mean it's not funny? I wrote it. What do you mean it's not funny? and to her credit, she's usually right.
Yeah. But would you write something serious or would you write comedy?
I find that when I sit down to write, it winds up being relatively serious. I am obsessed with the idea of enlightenment, and I guess in the Eastern sense. And I would love to write a story about a man who finds that the ordinary life is the most spiritual to live, but he has to go through a lot of hell to find that. So I do find myself writing about suffering more than joy.
I find smart guys do comedy well. I mean, in other words, you know, to really write or perform comedy, or to ad lib comedy, you really have to be very sharp. You have to be very smart. People don't necessarily. If you're an inventive comedian or comic actor, I think you have to be very smart.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think it was Aristotle who said that life to a man who feels is a tragedy, and life to a man who thinks is a comedy. And most of the comics I know are relatively smart people, at least extremely perceptive. I mean, their intelligence may be narrow, but it's precise.
They may not be educated, but they're smart.
Yes.
In writing comedy for your show, how soon before you perform it do they write it? I mean, when do you get a script and then put it up?
If we're lucky, by the middle of June, we start in late July. By the middle of June or the beginning of July, we'll have about 5 scripts already written, at least first draft, to where they can come to the table. We try to stay about 3 or 4 shows ahead, so that we can have some choices what goes on the air. But a script will go through an amazing metamorphosis from Monday to Friday, because you get it on its feet, and it sounds different than it does when you're just sitting around a table reading it. So we're rewriting every day on the present script, and on Tuesday morning we read. Just me and the other producers read the next week's script so that we can give notes, and while they're fixing the script we're going to tape Friday, they're working on the one next week as well.
Right. How connected are you to the real world in terms of, I don't mean quite like that, but I mean, working that kind of a schedule? Are you plugged into what's going on politically in the country? Do you have a lot of opinions about that? Are you a kind of guy who reads the Los Angeles Times or Wall Street Journal, New York Times every day and has strong opinions, or are you connected to?
I think it's a combination of the latter. I read a lot. I have a lot of opinions, but I don't express them a lot. You know, I get a little.
You worried about that? Afraid it'll hurt your?
No, I get PO'd at actors who take the advantage of their careers to foster personal agendas. You know, if I do that, I do it in a silent way, to where if I believe in something, I'll go behind the scenes and help it, or lend my name to a dinner committee for drug abuse or alcohol, whatever it might be that I'm interested in. You know, and I don't really want to tell people my opinions. I mean, my opinion is not that important. You know, until there's a king in America, I'm not going to be that interested.
Okay, we're not going to hear his opinions on political things right after these messages.
I am ashamed to say that I have just had an impulsive carnal liaison with a man.
Woo! Yes, well, my child, tell me all about it.
You see this tie? A La Porta original. These shoes, handcrafted in Madrid. The leather is culled from the soft underbelly of a calf.
And now it's covering the big feet of an ass.
What a guy.
Well, we're back with television star, film star, raconteur, bon vivant, whatever. A bunch of French words. John Larroquett. I want to say Larroquett. People mispronounce that a lot, don't they?
Yeah, it's Larroquett, actually. I guess originally,
Larroquett.
at some point, I guess it was L.A. capital R, because of the French. There was a Rue de la Roquette in Paris, and it's got one R in it.
Yeah, it's easy to mispronounce in this kind. I mean, they mispronounce a lot of.
Well, the Q gives them problems. It becomes Larroquetti, Larroquetti, Larroquett, which I like better. Larroquett.
Larroquett.
Yeah.
Mr. Larroquett. I was saying in the break that you filled in for Regis Philbin on his show. You also hosted the Tonight Show once. Not many actors, a lot of actors think they could host talk shows or do those kind of shows with the audience. You got to be funny. You got to do that stuff. Do you like that? Will we ever see you doing that?
I do like it. We talked earlier about this acting thing. I've always been very paranoid about doing much outside of acting, for fear that one gets identified in that field and then the other job becomes harder to get. That's one of the reasons I've not done any camera.
But what about getting tagged with comedy? I have the sense you could do tragedy or do serious stuff very, very well, but. There's a thing about, it's like Art Carney doing The Honeymooners. I've seen him do serious stuff, and later he got where you would accept him at that. For many years, you just look at Art Carney and you start to laugh.
Sure. Yeah.
And there are many times, nothing personal, but I mean, when I see you, sometimes I start to laugh. No, because
No,
they
that's
used to you
absolutely
in
right,
character.
and that is somewhat limiting. I mean, it is that people see you as, and whatever you did last, and if you did it good, they certainly would like you to do it again because it ensures them some measure of success in their endeavor. I think it's up to the actor. That's one of the reasons John Hemingway is so divergent from Dan Fielding. It was my choice not to rely on the tricks that I used as Dan Fielding to get popularity and acceptance. I really wanted to do somebody that was real different, who was drastically apart from him personality-wise, and that's just the actor in me craving to portray other men.
In making that switch at the beginning of the series, there was some criticism that maybe you went too far in being serious or taking that character too dark
Yes.
and not light enough. Am
Yes.
I right?
Yeah, and I think that was an accurate criticism. I believe that I try to give too much at once of the sort of the ennui of this character and the environment that he lived in. I think in the bottom line, a sitcom has to be a place where people want to visit. And I think I was a little too harsh in creating the environment, not just myself, but the writers and the executive producer, Don Rio, who created it. We all thought this would be a fun place. And I think if this show had originated 10 years ago, it would have been more easily accepted because workplace comedies with ethnic cast, it's a rarity if you look at the landscape of television right now, that we have so many different colors on our show. And our shows are either all white or all black, or there's not that mix that I think America certainly is this day.
Now that you're making a couple bucks, because I know they pay you a couple bucks for that show, do you have a big extravagance? What do you spend your money on when you really just blow it? You want to say, okay, I want to go really do something.
Books.
Books?
Yeah, rare books.
Really?
Mostly modern firsts. Modern first fiction. The big guys, Hemingway and Faulkner and Steinbeck, Samuel Beckett. I have a collection of almost 2,000 books of Samuel Beckett alone. One of the largest collections in private hands in America, and a lot of the stuff, his actual book.
You know there are
plays.
people driving over to your house right now.
Well,
They know you're here.
I've always
They're
felt
here.
safe, though. I know if somebody broke into my house, they would rather steal my Cuisinart because they would see a book on the wall and they wouldn't know what the hell they were looking at. So
Yeah, that's true.
that is probably the thing. And photographs. I've been collecting photographers of late. Ansel Adams and Eugene Smith, some of the big photographers of the 20th century.
Somebody broke into my place once and stole my cameras, and there was an original Lincoln right there on the wall above the bureau where they stole the cameras.
There you are.
So
There you
I
are.
mean, it's true.
But that's.
I gave that Lincoln away. It's no longer there. Don't go to my apartment. But,
I would think that's probably the thing I spend the most money on.
is that right?
And I'll pop down whatever I want for them. My wife sometimes has a little trouble with it, but we understand each other now.
How good a father are you? You pretty good?
Whoa. Boy. I try to be. Certainly there was a time when I was drinking that I was absent, and I certainly wasn't taking care of the duties that I should have. But I would hope to think that in the 14 years that I've been sober, I've made some amends to them, and that they're relatively happy with having come from my gene pool. I try to spend as much time with them as I can.
Because of that time you were neglecting because of your own problems, did they resent it? Did you have to make up to them?
Not a lot. Fortunately, they were all very young when I got sober, and I wasn't abusive. I didn't do any of that stuff.
You weren't a mean drunk.
Not at all. If anything, I would just sort of disappear for a few days because I was ashamed of drinking in front of them, etc. I mean, every drunk has his problems and besides the drinking. But as they've grown up now, my daughter's 25, my son is 18, and when my other son is 8. The 8-year-old has no clue because I was, sober 6 years before he was ever born. I spend as much time with him as I can and try to at least, I know I can't teach them by talking. I have to try to just live a life that they hopefully will emulate.
What are you going to tell your 8-year-old about drinking? And when he gets old enough, the guys want to go out and have a couple beers, and are you going to just...
If he can have a couple, that's fine.
Yeah.
If he can have a couple, that's fine. I'm not against drinking. My wife drinks, but she treats alcohol like a beverage, something I don't quite understand. I don't think like that. Alcohol is medicine to me, if they can handle it, I don't have any opinions about them not drinking. I'm certainly not a temperance monger. I don't think that's my business. If they have a problem, I hope that they'll come to me and be able to talk to me about it so I can share my experience with them on it.
How have you changed in terms of your own, we talked about your religious beliefs, but how have you changed as a person since those days 20 years ago?
Unfortunately, I think at this point in my life, I'm a little more cynical than I was about the world in general. I blame television partially for that, but in my personal life, I'm very optimistic about myself and my immediate family. I'm a little depressed about how it seems like most of us are treating each other right now.
The world. I mean,
Yeah.
the country or the world?
The world.
The world.
The world. And I guess the country is a microcosm of the world.
We have less fighting going on. Bosnia's bad, but I mean, we have less fighting going on right now in the world than we have in past decades.
Yeah, that's true. You don't think there's a higher level of distrust amongst us as individuals, though, toward each other?
Yeah, I think that's true. How would television have affected that, though? I think that...
I blame television because, and this is really biting the hand that feeds you, and I don't talk about this a lot. There was a book written in the 70s by Jerry Mander called Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And his opinion was that the medium itself, the electronic medium, was malevolent, not necessarily what you put across it. But I have a problem with people thinking they've had an experience by watching something on that screen. Somewhere in the back of my mind, when I watched them bomb Iraq, or I watched the riots in Los Angeles, or I watched the O.J. Simpson trial, I sometimes think that part of my psyche believes I've actually done that, and I haven't. I've watched flickering images of it. I have not experienced that. So it offers me more stress in my life than I really need to have.
That's true.
Quite honestly, whatever happens in Bosnia does not affect me in one way or another at all. It doesn't have any effect on my life. And yet I walk around with that knowledge every day and maybe make whatever minor decision in my life based on that information, which somewhere in me I think is actually part of my experience, and it's not.
Yeah, but you don't want to shut down that kind of input. I mean, you feel sorry for the people in Bosnia, do you?
Sure. Oh, of course, of course. But I think to remove it one step, for me to read about it in a newspaper.
The horrors of war are what eventually brought the end of the Vietnam War. It was the first one we did in the living room. We saw these people bleeding. We said, war's not as exciting as it looks in the old World War II movies.
Yeah, but you may be absolutely right about that. And but at the same time, I think that I don't like the idea of me thinking that somehow I had that direct experience, because I didn't. I can read about it in a newspaper and be as horrified about it. I can look at still pictures of it. There is a distance in all of the media that there is not in television. There is a moment of reflection.
Isn't it really that television goes after the negative image? I mean, it really seeks it out. It highlights it. It embraces it. It overkills it. It runs it for too long.
Yes.
It turns a one-day story into a 10-day story.
I think it's somewhat television is a little guilty of yellow journalism. That if we don't save the child, just take a picture of it. And that's a real jaded view. And there are a lot of people who are very compassionate in this business, and I know that. And I don't have any, but I do wish we would spend a little less time spotlighting the degradation in our society, and a little more. And I don't mean like happy news. Johnny found his cat today.
And then he torched it.
But I
That's what they cover.
I wish there was a little more positive, because when you really look at it, that it is a minuscule amount of people in the world who are causing trouble. The rest of us are trying to get up every day and have a good life and treat each other well.
That's a good note to end on, and a good one. John Larroquett.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good luck on the show. We'll be right back. When we come back, you're going to meet former New York City Mayor. He's feeling fine. David Dinkins will be here. Stay with us.